That's perfect. Now you'll get all of Matt's recorded and none of mine will be recorded. And that's great because he's the real deal and I was just a fluffy stuff at the end.
Sorry about that, Alexandra. I just realized as I looked at my notes to announce that we were recording it to resume the recording.
Perfect comic timing. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So good morning or afternoon, everybody. We're going to go through the details of the program and just, one other housekeeping piece. Before you start flooding the question and answer with your immediate questions, just hold on a second because we'll probably get to a bunch of them right here, and it'll just make it easier for Sam to manage that at the end. We will be uploading an FAQ document on the CIF website that'll also address a lot of things that have come up over the last 2 weeks. And this recording will get posted by probably Monday on the Community Investment Fund website, so you can go back and revisit that. On the CIF website, if you haven't looked at it, the policy and guidelines documents, as well as links to the CIF board meetings and their minutes, it's all available on the website, and that can be helpful to really understanding the program as well as you're preparing your application. So let's start with eligible applicants. So there are 3 categories of eligible applicants. Municipalities, and that is linked on the website. There are 54 eligible municipalities. They are the public investment communities and alliance school districts. And then the municipality itself can be an applicant, as well as any community development corporations and nonprofit organizations that serve those municipalities. Joint applications are allowed, but both applicants need to be eligible. So it could be 2 eligible nonprofits or an eligible municipality and an eligible nonprofit. If you are a nonprofit organization or a community development corporation that serves multiple communities, all of the community investment funds need to be clearly used towards a project that serves the eligible communities. So the nonprofit doesn't need to be physically located in the eligible community, but you're going to need to document that all of the CIF dollars are going towards the eligible community. So right now, as I said, there's 54 eligible communities, and the Public Investment Community Index gets updated on an annual basis. The current eligible communities will remain eligible for the 5 years of the CIF program. So if your community drops off the pick list or the alliance list in 2 years, for example, you will retain eligibility. However, new communities could be added in the future. And this is information that we do have in the policy and guideline document. So now the next piece is our eligible projects. So there's 2 clear pieces. An eligible project must promote economic or community development in the municipality where the project is located. And the entire statutory language here is that such project or grant and aid furthers the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved and marginalized communities that have been denied such treatment, such as Black, Latino, Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer persons, and other persons comprising the LGBTQ+ community, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. So when you're identifying what your project is, your economic or community development project, the thing that I keep saying to groups when we have our one-on-one conversations on this is you need to draw a really clear line to identifying what this issue is in your community that's affecting this target population, and then connecting that very clearly to the project that you're proposing. So the types of projects then that you propose, there's 2 big buckets: capital improvements and small business support programs. So an eligible project is a project that's proposed by a municipality, community development corporation, or nonprofit for the purpose of promoting economic or community development in the municipality, or a municipality served by such corporation or organization, such as brownfield remediation, affordable housing, establishment of or improvements to water and sewer infrastructure to support smaller scale economic development, pedestrian safety and traffic calming improvements, establishments of or improvements to energy resiliency or clean energy projects, and land acquisition and capital projects to construct, rehabilitate, or renovate buildings and structures to facilitate or improve home rehabilitation programs and facilities such as libraries or senior centers. And then the other side is the small business support programs. So that language says that it's a grant and aid proposed by a municipality, community development corp, or nonprofit organization for the purpose of providing either a revolving loan program, microloans, or gap financing to small businesses located within such municipality, or provide startup funds to establish a small business in any such municipality. So for these projects, there's a minimum of $250,000 of proposed CIF funding, but there's no limit, there's no maximum to how much you can request. However, the CIF board did vote when they voted on their policies and guidelines for the program that they would consider partial funding for proposed projects. So for communities that are early on, there is an opportunity to explain where you are. And you can really do that when you're addressing the shovel readiness of your project. And the last question there really, the last part of that question, I should say, really allows you to say where you are if you're earlier on in the development of your project. The statute also requires that any proposed loan or financing must utilize an interest rate that does not vary from the prevailing market rate. So whatever you are proposing, if you're doing a small business support program proposal, you need to demonstrate how your rate is consistent with similar programs. So, and then another clarification, a question that we receive quite often with the small business support. So this is for a CDC, a nonprofit, or a municipality to develop a program that is going to provide startup funding to establish a small business. But small businesses in eligible municipalities are not cannot be a direct applicant to CIF themselves. If you're a small business on here and you're in an eligible municipality, this is an opportunity to have conversations with nonprofit organizations or with your municipality itself about your ideas. So in the statute, the language that is authorized CIF also provides 4 ways that projects get prioritization. And you're going to have the opportunity to indicate on your application if you have any of these priorities as part of your project. You don't need to have them all to receive priority. There's an or between them. So the first is that the application includes a project labor agreement or other employment proposal to employ ex-offenders or individuals with physical, intellectual, or developmental disabilities. The second is that the municipality has implemented local hiring preferences pursuant to Section 7-112 of the general statutes. The third is that the applicant has or will leverage municipal, private, philanthropic, or federal funds for such a project. So no state funding is considered leverage. And it's not a match. There's no ratio of leverage. It just says that any additional funding. And then the final is a letter of support. So the application would need to include a letter of support from one or more members of the General Assembly in whose district the project will be located. And for a nonprofit or a community development corporation, just as clarity, you don't need to have a letter from your municipality, from the mayor, the town council. The General Assembly member is the letter that you need to trigger this prioritization. You can include a letter of support from your municipality as well. So as DECD is going to be reviewing this, so this program is very different than other grant programs that DECD runs. The Community Investment Fund has a board of directors that will be making the decision on which grants to recommend to the governor for funding. And I'm going to go through those steps a little bit. DECD is the administrator will review the programs for their eligibility, everything that we went over, and highlight the statutory priorities, as well as applications that align with the state's economic action plan. And that's available on the CIF website. We have a link to the state's action plan. The 4 pillars of it are of the inclusive growth outlined in the economic action plan include workforce, communities, innovation, and business environment. So I'd recommend looking at this as you're working on your grant narrative. DECD is also going to assess proposals to see how they align with DECD best practices and represent an efficient use of taxpayer funds. So what does that mean? Projects that are shovel ready, projects that are leveraging funding, a realistic and comprehensive budget, limiting soft costs, and a realistic and comprehensive project plan. For municipalities as applicants, in accordance with the Connecticut General Statute 8-23 and amended by Public Act 15-95, any municipality that has not adopted a plan of conservation and development within the past 10 years is ineligible for discretionary state funding unless they request and receive a waiver from prohibition by the OPM secretary. Municipalities will need to submit a municipal certification of eligibility for discretionary state funding. And then also want to flag for you now that projects may require additional review under the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA. For capital projects that involve federal funding, the project will need to be in compliance with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. If a project is successful in receiving a grant, it will have to be in compliance with SEPA, and there's additional information that you can find on the State Historic Preservation Office website. For small business support programs, the statute requires that certain factors will be taken into consideration by the CIF board, and that's going to be around alignment with best practices. Per the statute, financing programs that vary from the prevailing market rate shall not be recommended for funding. An example of prevailing market rate would be the Connecticut Small Business Boost Program. So let's talk through what this review process is that I mentioned. So eligible applicants are going to submit their applications via the CIF website, and then DECD will review the applications for their eligibility. We'll notify any ineligible applicants, and eligible applications are going to be summarized by all of these different criteria that are in the statute, and then they're going to be forwarded to the Community Investment Fund Board. The CIF board will review eligible applications and then vote on recommendations. These recommendations from the board go to the governor. The governor is going to review the recommended applications and issue a final recommendation that will go to the State Bond Commission. And then the State Bond Commission will issue the approvals for projects. So, one thing to emphasize here, there is, again, no scoring. There's not a rubric or points per question on your application. That type of, we've had a lot of questions on, what gets more weight. It's the statutory prioritizations, it's alignment with DECD best practices and the state's economic action plan, and then really the core of the project, that you're an eligible municipality serving a target underserved population through your project that's going to have, as the CIF board continues to say, a transformational impact on your community. So now the timeline. July 25th at 11:59 p.m. is the deadline. We will have the application portal live very shortly on the CIF website. Then over the next 2 months, DECD will be assessing everything. The CIF board is scheduled to meet on September 27th to review and recommend applications. The governor then in early October would review and issue final recommendations for approved projects. The governor, in the statute, within 2 months of board approval, the governor is supposed to forward his recommendations to the Bond Commission. And then the Bond Commission will be scheduled, and that will be the final approval. Now, in terms of timeline, so for projects, because we're looking for things that are shovel ready to a degree, they can be in process. There's not a set point in terms of the process, how far or early you are down the road. But my guidance is to give a vision for the full project, what the end point is of the project. If it's a multi-phase long-term project, help the board see the end result, the impact, this transformational impact that this is going to have on the population and the issue in the community. Communities, organizations can come back to CIF in future rounds for additional funding or for the same project if it isn't funded in a round, provided that you've had the ability to address any concerns that are communicated to you on your previous application. So how to apply? Right now, you can go to the CIF website and you can view the policy and guidelines document that was adopted by the CIF board. You can review the notice of funding availability, as well as the application. If you click on view application preview, that is all of the questions that will be in the application portal. So you can be working on your questions and be able to save them in a Word document and put them into the application portal as soon as it's open. There's also an application instruction document that I really recommend you review. It has kind of really nitty-gritty things. We will have an FAQ document up on the website tomorrow. And we'll continue to update that with relevant questions. So you can send any questions that you have to Community Investment Fund at ct.gov. You're going to be, in terms of the application submission, the web portal is going to be an electronic portal online. We're not going to be accepting any paper or hard copies. Please don't email applications to me or to the Community Investment Fund email or send along separate attachments. There's going to be the opportunity to have several attachments that are allowed, and you're going to be able to bulk upload those when you submit on the final page of the application. There are no word or character limits to your narrative responses. So we want you to be able to thoroughly answer each question, but we're not looking for excessive information or, your novel. In terms of attachments and file types, JPEG, PDF, Word, Excel, just very basic file types. If you have architectural plans and designs, please make sure that you're converting them into one of those types and not sending along CAD files or some other file type that we might not be able to access. And, again, right now you can sign up for one-on-one meetings with myself. If you have more nuanced questions, you can email any questions that you have to Community Investment Fund at ct.gov. And I'm sure that we have a lot of questions that have been submitted in the Q&A. So I will turn it over now to Sam to kick us off with some of these questions.
Great. Again, this presentation will be available on our website. Both the slides are already up on the website, and a recording of this presentation will also be up on the website. We had a question about exactly what we mean by shovel ready. So I think Matt or Alexandra, if you want to just explain a bit more how we're thinking about shovel ready projects and sort of what how that plays into the application. It's not a requirement that projects be shovel ready, but that could be something that the board looks to approve more quickly.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, and there's no threat. This isn't a threshold or eligibility issue. It's not as if you have to be a certain level of shovel ready to be eligible. It just is an element that we are likely going to highlight if they're two equally qualified projects that do very similar things that have similarly great benefits, but one is further along in its development process, more shovel ready, so to speak. That would be a plus when DECD goes to write up our summary of the application will highlight that element. Hey, this is great, and it's really far along and pretty likely to get done because they already have all their permits, etc. So it would be kind of a plus or a bonus for that project, sorry, but not, as I said, a requirement. So you should, early stage projects should also feel free to apply, and hopefully make sure that you really do a good job of conveying why the board should fund a project that's early, because it's just that great and has that much of a potential along the
way. A couple of questions are getting at the idea of whether a CIF project could also have received state funding elsewhere, or if the organization that's applying was recently awarded something through Urban Act or another DECD program. So
there's a part of the application that asks for your history with other state funding, because it is really important to us to make sure we're not funding the same scope twice from different pots of state money. We also just want to make sure we're making the most efficient use of state money. If you're already working with one agency and have gotten an award with them, maybe it makes sense to keep working with that agency, and as opposed to start with a completely new funding source from a different part of the state. So it's really important that we know what you have gotten and what you have applied for and not yet heard back about potentially, so that we can just optimize state funds. But doesn't disqualify you. It's not as if it's absolutely possible that a project could get funds from different state funds at one time. It's just that we want to know, and we want to be able to track that and make sure that we're doing that in an efficient way.
A couple of questions are getting at what sorts of projects are eligible. So just broadly, I would really encourage people to look through our website to read the different documents that are posted up there, including, again, this slideshow, which is posted there, but also the longer documents that explain all the different sorts of eligible projects that could be funded through CIF. One question in particular asks about funding for schools. So I think one big picture response that's helpful, I think, to lots of folks on the call. For proposals that are purely programmatic, so if you're trying to fund the operating expense of a program that you're running, that is not an eligible project under Community Investment Fund. Community Investment Fund is funding capital improvement projects, so essentially one-time capital costs, or small business support programs, so small business loan, or in some instance, grant for startups.
And
go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say another piece of that is the municipality that is eligible should be the lead applicant. So we've had questions, can different kind of boards or commissions within a municipality apply directly, and the municipality should be the lead applicant, so not the Board of Education, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sam, if I could go back to the types of eligible projects, because I get a lot of these questions by email as well. And, these again are supposed to be transformational projects. So if you're a nonprofit, or a CDC, a municipality, and you have a facility that needs a new roof, that is a capital project. But again, you want to go to the questions that are talking about the need in the community, the target population that's going to be served. And we're looking for big transformational opportunities here that have a big impact. So, look forward. What is your strategic vision? What is the ultimate goal that you want to have for your organization and the type of impact? And think bigger than just the new roof. What are the other things that need to happen under that roof that are going to change the community? So fast forward 10 years in your strategic plan, and this is an opportunity to move in that direction.
Question about time frame for grant awards. So, is there a requirement that the funding be used within 1 year? The answer to that is no. We don't have a hard and fast rule for requiring how quickly funds are spent or committed. It is a DECD best practice. I think we can say that funds be expended, I think, within 3 to 5 years. But the answer is that it'll be on a project by project basis.
Yeah.
We will provide a recommendation to the CIF board. Probably a recommendation that's broadly applicable, but then maybe project by project may change. It's going to be up to the CIF board to approve any conditions that are attached to an award. But it's certainly not going to be required that funds are expended 1 year from the time of the award. That's definitely not going to be a requirement. Answer that question. Not-for-profit can nonprofit be funded for property that they don't own? Yes. So property acquisition, land acquisition, is an eligible expense for a capital improvement project. So if you are an organization that is looking to start a capital improvement project, you need to purchase the land, that's an eligible expense. We do ask in the application to explain what is your pathway toward ultimately acquiring and completing the project that you propose. If you are not, if the property isn't for sale, if you don't have a sort of a plan for how to acquire and develop the property, that's going to be a much weaker application than if you are already in talks with the current owner or, have detailed architectural plans for what the project will look like. So those are considerations that the board will take into account. Question about, I'm just skipping, but I'll skip back. A question about the minimum amount for a capital for any project. We've set it at 250,000, and there's a request going to be less than 250,000 for a capital project. The short answer is no. We set that minimum because, as Matt has said a few times, we really want these to be large transformational projects that are long lasting for the community. Something for less than 250,000, it's difficult to see how that would be the case. I do think that, it's up to the discretion of the CIF board. If they want to partially fund a project at a lower cost, then it's maybe in an early stage, that's at their discretion, but you should not propose a project that is going to cost less than 250,000. Okay.
The question about how is funding dispersed, this is also done, but for the most part, the answer is on a reimbursable basis, as is suggested by the question. There are some scenarios where maybe if it would be done, some portions would be forwarded, but the vast majority of this will be done on a reimbursement basis.
A question about if capital improvement is used to benefit individuals who may not be residents of the town.
I am inclined to say that's fine, because I think the requirement is that the improvement be located in the specific municipality. I don't think we're at the point of putting boundaries as to who's allowed to go in and out of these buildings. So I think as long as the building itself is located in an eligible area, I think you're fine.
A good question about are nonprofits without a 501c3 designation eligible to apply? So this is a great question. We've gotten these questions a lot. We have read the statute to mean that a few different types of not-for-profit organizations that are tax exempt are eligible: 501c3, 501c6, 501c7. We read those as all being eligible to apply. But you need to provide proof that your organization is one of those tax exempt organizations recognized by the IRS to meet that baseline eligibility threshold. Okay.
So there's a question in terms of projects that are already in progress and if they're eligible. And yes, but we're looking for projects that are in process in terms of shovel readiness. But I think that it's important that you demonstrate that this project needs CIF funding to move forward. If this project is moving along and you're just looking to kind of peel off some of your own fundraising to take advantage of CIF, and it doesn't demonstrate that this is a good, effective use of taxpayer dollars, I would say that there would be less inclination from the CIF board to fund that type of project.
There's a question about can a different type of state bond program be used as leverage for CIF funding? So what the CIF statute says is that projects will get priority if they have leverage from federal, municipal, or private sources. So that's to give a project priority. If your leverage is another state source, you are not eligible for that priority boost in your application. That's not to say that you can't use other state funds in your project. That's totally up to you, but it won't be counted as leverage for the purpose of a priority. That's that question. Rent of a new space.
So there's a question about CIF supporting grant programs in an eligible community. So, again, CIF is for capital projects. In terms of the small business side, it can be the only place where the statute allows for grants to be issued would be for new startup businesses.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of related question as to whether those can be not-for-profit businesses or startups. I don't know that we've discussed that, Matt and Alexandra. So we may need to.
Yeah, I think
it's a good question.
That's a good question. We'll include it in our FAQs.
Yeah.
Startup expenses for a startup nonprofit. That's the question.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that could not be funded directly by us unless the nonprofit was the only programming that the CIF funds are directly going to fund are small business support programs. So if you're talking about a nonprofit that does anything other than small business support, say it does rescues animals, it needs to get it would be getting its funding from a program that was funded by CIF to fund lots of startups, lots of nonprofits, but the CIF funds are not going to go directly into any new programs other than small business support programs.
Yeah, and even then, administrative costs are going to be capped. So, like, only a limited amount of funds would go toward your administering the small business loans or grants. It would be limited to a certain
yes, a reasonable market rate.
Yeah.
But the follow-on, a small business that was going to receive grants from those programs might receive programming funds if that was what was within the scope of that small business support program. I know this is sounding a little bit confusing with multiple different levels. So if there are specific questions on this, folks can reach out to us to get one-on-one time.
Somebody asked, can we submit an application? I'm not sure exactly what the question is. There on the website, Matt, you can explain our timeline for, yeah.
I think there was they asked a first question, they didn't get to the second half of it.
Oh, got it. Well, in any case, on the website right now, you can look at what the application will consist of and all the different questions. The form for applying, we are working through some technical difficulties. It'll be up very soon, where you can actually go in, enter your answers, and hit send. But if you're eager to apply, I would encourage you to look at the application, to draft all your responses, because all of the questions are there, so that once we have it up on the website, you can just copy and paste and hit submit.
So we have a question on would CIF support a faith-based Catholic school capital project? And again, if a project is from an eligible applicant, so if it's the municipality, nonprofit organization, or CDC in an eligible municipality, and it connects to what the other criteria are. You would have to show that this capital project, just as every other applicant would, why this capital project is supporting transformational growth to this specific target population and need in the community.
Okay. Will CIF support program-related grants ineligible? I think we sort of answered that question. This is not we don't support programming. We support either capital improvement or small business support loans and grants.
There's a question about minimum match. There is no minimum match or leverage. It's only just to be considered for priority or to get, bonus points, however you want to describe it. But you do not, there's none required. Any issue with combining both build out and start ups in the proposal? I think maybe we need to follow up directly. Build out would be fine. That would be eligible, but startups, like we were saying, funding directly startups would not be eligible.
Right. And I think adding on to that, if you're requesting capital funding to build out a new facility or space that your organization has not been operating, I think that another piece that then is necessary in your application is showing how that space will then be sustainable. What are your operating plans for that space so that CIF isn't funding a new facility that then doesn't have the ability to go forward and operate and serve the community?
Building a food pantry within a nonprofit's affordable housing seems like it would very likely be eligible. Obviously, there's always details, but if you're doing the capital project, the physical build out of a food pantry, that's looking likely to me. This latest question is about reimbursing funding a project that's already in process. And I think it gets sort of tricky, and it's going to be a little bit judgment on a case-by-case basis. Projects that are already in flight are certainly eligible to apply. What's important, again, I think Matt said this on a previous answer, is we want to make sure that these are funding projects that would not otherwise go forward and that really need the funds. And so it's a bit tricky if something's already in process to demonstrate that it really needs these funds. So perhaps it's a project that's already in process, but you're actually going to build a phase 2, or the scope's going to be increased as a result of these new funds. Those are stories that, that's a case that you can definitely make to us. If it's basically the same project that was planned and then we're just going to reimburse the original funders, then that would be very unlikely to go forward.
Will appraisals be required for acquisition? Yes. And then the question in terms of rent for a new space as improvements are being done and the project is actualized. I think, probably a little bit more information would be needed, but, you'd be looking at the full project budget for what this means to your organization or to your facility.
Yeah, so again, a question about like a project that's already in process, and an applicant may need additional funding to get over the finish line because of cost overruns. That is an eligible project, but again, I would just encourage that applicant to make the case to the CIF board that it's a transformational project, that it serves the goals that Matt talked about earlier in his presentation, and that without CIF funding, this project would not be completed. It's sort of up to you to make the case to the CIF board in your application materials. Generally, I would just add that we're still working through exactly what the kind of later stage protocols will be in terms of the CIF board meetings. You should not expect that you're going to get to speak with board members. We may not have the opportunity for every single eligible applicant to make its case to the board. So you should put everything, your entire rationale for your application should be in your application materials that you send to us. Don't leave something out expecting that you'll be able to talk to someone and explain it at a later date. Really just include the full rationale in your materials.
It looks like we have reached the end of the line with questions. So thank you everybody for attending. And any further questions we get, we will work to update our FAQs, including the one that just came in regarding DOH and CHFA. We'll work to include that in the FAQ document that's going to go up. The recording of this will be on the webinar. Our application portal should be open. Everybody that has signed up for a webinar will be notified via email when the application portal is opened. And Community Investment Fund at ct.gov if you have questions. And I've just added new one-on-one slots on the calendar for one-on-one appointments. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Have a great day, everybody.